The warnings about Deathworlders had been drilled into Gray since childhood. Every young member of the Spiral Alliance learned about these terrifying beings who evolved on worlds that should never have supported life. Planets with crushing gravity, extreme temperature swings, and aggressive wildlife that would kill any reasonable species. Yet somehow, against all logic, life not only survived but thrived in these hellish conditions. Gray stood at the observation deck of the Alliance exploration vessel Lightseeker, watching the strange blue-green world grow larger in the viewport, Earth. Even from orbit, it looked threatening with its swirling storm systems and vast oceans. The gravity readings alone made Gray feel weak, nearly twice what any civilized planet should have. "Ambassador, we're picking up an approaching vessel," the ship's navigator announced, their delicate fingers trembling slightly as they adjusted the holographic controls. It's a human ship." Gray's protective scales shifted nervously, but they maintained their diplomatic composure. This was why they were here after all. The Alliance Council had finally decided it was time to make official contact with the Deathworlders of Earth. Better to approach them diplomatically than risk them becoming a threat later. The human ship was ugly by Alliance standards, all sharp angles and exposed metal, built for function rather than beauty. It reminded Gray of the predatory creatures that occasionally plagued Alliance worlds before they were eliminated for safety. A sudden alarm blared through the ship. "Ambassador, we have a problem." The navigator's voice rose in panic. "The gravity stabilizers are failing. We're being pulled into the planet's gravity well." Gray felt their stomach lurch as the artificial gravity flickered. Without stable gravity control, their ship's delicate systems would be crushed by Earth's powerful gravitational pull. The crew rushed to their emergency stations, but their movements were already compromised by the increasing gravitational pressure. "Broadcast a distress signal," Gray ordered, trying to keep their voice steady. "All frequencies." The response came faster than anyone expected. The human vessel, which had been maintaining a respectful distance, immediately changed course. A voice crackled through their communication system, speaking in carefully measured tones. "Alliance vessel, this is Captain Miller of the Earth ship Steadfast. We see you're in trouble. We're coming to help. Please remain calm." The crew watched in fascination and horror as the human ship maneuvered alongside them. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Humans in protective suits emerged from their vessel, moving through space with practiced ease despite the gravitational forces that were crippling the Alliance crew. They attached stabilizing devices to the Lightseeker's hull and began working on the failing systems. Gray observed through the viewport as the humans worked. Their movements were precise and powerful, completely unfazed by conditions that had the Alliance crew barely able to stand. But what struck Gray most wasn't their physical capabilities. It was their careful handling of the Alliance ship. These supposed monsters of legend were treating the Lightseeker's delicate hull with remarkable gentleness. "Gravity stabilizers back online," the navigator announced with relief. The crushing pressure eased, and the crew began to recover. The human captain requested permission to board, which Gray granted. When the airlock cycled open, Gray got their first close look at a Deathworlder. Captain Miller was shorter than expected but built solid, with thick limbs that spoke of evolution in high gravity. Yet his expression was open and friendly as he approached, carefully matching his pace to accommodate the Alliance crew's comfort level. "Looks like you folks had a close call," Miller said, his voice carrying none of the aggressive undertones Gray had been warned about. "Good thing we were in the neighborhood. Those older model stabilizers can be tricky near stronger gravity wells." "You have our deepest gratitude," Gray replied, studying the human with growing curiosity. "I must admit, this is not how I imagined our first official contact would go." Miller smiled, a gesture that on any other predatory species would have been threatening, but somehow wasn't. Sometimes the best introductions happen by accident. "Speaking of which, we'd be honored to escort you to the designated landing facility, just in case any other systems decide to act up." As the human captain coordinated with his crew and the Alliance navigator, Gray found themselves reevaluating everything they thought they knew about Deathworlders. These humans were undeniably powerful, yes. Their casual mastery over conditions that threatened to kill the Alliance crew proved that. But they wielded that power with restraint and compassion. Perhaps, Gray thought, watching Miller gently explain the gravity compensation procedures to a junior crew member, they had been asking the wrong questions all along. The real question wasn't how dangerous Deathworlders could be, but rather what they chose to do with their strength. The transport pod descended through Earth's atmosphere, and Gray's scales rippled with anxiety. Even with the enhanced gravity stabilizers, they could feel the planet's pull. Captain Stone sat across from them, looking perfectly comfortable despite the turbulence. "First time on Earth?" Stone asked, noticing Gray's discomfort. When Gray nodded, he smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry. We've adjusted all the diplomatic facilities to match Alliance standard gravity. You'll be comfortable inside." Gray wanted to believe him, but the view outside the window made that difficult. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and lightning flashed in the distance. On their homeworld, such weather patterns would trigger an immediate evacuation. Here, Stone hadn't even mentioned it. The pod touched down at the diplomatic compound in a place humans called Colorado. Gray stepped out, their protective environment suit automatically adjusting to filter the denser atmosphere. The first thing that struck them was the mountains, massive peaks of bare rock that seemed to tear at the sky itself. On their world, such geological formations would have been smoothed away ages ago. "Those are the Rocky Mountains," Stone explained, following Gray's gaze. "They're young as mountains go, only about 80 million years old. Still growing, actually." "Growing?" Gray's voice carried a note of alarm. "Your geological features are still actively changing." Stone nodded, seemingly amused. "Wait until I tell you about earthquakes and volcanic activity. But don't worry, this region is pretty stable." The next few days were a constant stream of surprises. Inside the compound, things were manageable thanks to the gravity controls. But each time Gray ventured out for their cultural observations, they discovered new aspects of Earth that challenged their understanding of habitable conditions. They watched in amazement as human children played in an outside recreation area, running and jumping in Earth's full gravity as if it were nothing. When a small wildlife creature, Stone called it a squirrel, scurried past, none of the humans even flinched at the presence of an uncontrolled animal. During a diplomatic dinner, Gray watched their human hosts casually drink water that had been sitting in open containers. On their world, exposing drinking water to open air would be unthinkably dangerous. Yet here, it was normal. The weather proved to be the most shocking element. One morning, white crystals began falling from the sky. "Snow," Stone explained. Instead of initiating emergency protocols, humans bundled up in insulating garments and went about their normal routines. Some even expressed joy at the precipitation of frozen water. "I don't understand," Gray admitted to Stone as they watched humans clearing paths through the snow. "How do you live like this? How do you maintain a civilization with so many environmental threats?" Stone considered the question carefully. "I suppose we don't see them as threats anymore. Each challenge forced us to adapt, to innovate. Take the snow, for example. It taught us to build better shelters, to store food, to work together as communities during harsh weather. Those lessons helped us develop technology, culture, even art." Gray watched as two human children rolled snow into balls and began constructing some kind of temporary structure. "You turn survival challenges into entertainment." "Sometimes," Stone chuckled. "Those kids are building a snowman. It's not just about fun, though. It teaches them coordination, cooperation, creativity. Every hardship we faced shaped us in ways we're still discovering." Later that week, Stone took Gray to something called a Museum of Natural History. Inside were displays of Earth's ancient life forms, massive creatures that made even modern Earth wildlife look tame in comparison. "These dominated our world for millions of years," Stone explained, gesturing to the fossilized remains of something called a Tyrannosaurus rex. Our earliest ancestors had to survive alongside predators like these. It's part of why we developed our intelligence, our tool use, our social bonds. Standing there, looking at the evidence of Earth's brutal evolutionary history, Gray began to understand something profound about humans. They weren't simply strong because they came from a high-gravity world. They were adaptable because they had to be, resilient because anything less meant extinction. And somehow, through it all, they had maintained the capacity for kindness, for art, for turning their survival skills into games that taught their children. Perhaps, Gray said slowly, we have been too quick to judge worlds like Earth as hostile. We see the dangers, but not the opportunities they create. Stone smiled. That's why these cultural exchanges are so important. We all have different strengths to share. Speaking of sharing, would you like to try building a snowman? I promise the gravity assist suit will help. Gray looked outside at the falling snow, feeling a mix of their old fear and a new curiosity. I think I would like that. The emergency alert woke Gray in the middle of their sleep cycle. Another colony had gone silent, the third one this month. As they rushed to the Alliance Council chamber, their scales darkened with worry. They already knew what they would find. The council room was in chaos when they arrived. The main display showed the burning ruins of New Haven Colony, its delicate structures crushed and broken. The raiders had struck again, but this time they had left something behind. Bodies. The sight made Gray's inner membranes constrict with horror. They're getting bolder, Elder Reed announced, her voice trembling. This isn't just raiding anymore. They're sending us a message. The footage continued playing. Dark ships, built like angular predators, descended on the colony with terrible precision. The Alliance defenders never stood a chance. Their energy shields, designed to deflect normal weapons, crumpled under the raiders' brute force attacks. Even worse were the glimpses of the raiders themselves. Tall, heavily built figures moving with ease in New Haven's gravity. More Deathworlders, someone whispered, the words carrying a wave of fear through the chamber. Gray stepped forward. Not like the humans, they said firmly. These raiders are something else entirely. The council turned to Gray, their collective attention focused on the one among them who had spent the most time with Earth's Deathworlders. Since returning from their diplomatic mission, Gray had become their unofficial expert on high-gravity species. The attack pattern is all wrong, Gray continued, gesturing to the footage. Humans value protection, defense. These raiders, they're deliberately causing maximum destruction. They're enjoying it. Elder Reed nodded slowly. Perhaps. But what can we do? Our weapons are useless against their ships. Our troops can't match their physical strength. We've lost 3 colonies in a month. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Spiral Alliance had spent generations building their civilization around harmony and efficiency. Their ships were swift and elegant, their weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. Against an enemy that relied on pure brutality, they were helpless. A junior council member spoke up, their voice barely audible. What about the humans? Their ships are built for combat. Their people are strong. Impossible. Elder Voss cut in. We can't trust our defense to Deathworlders. What if they turn on us too? Gray felt their scales flush with frustration. I've been to Earth. I've seen their cities, their children. Humans don't want conquest. They have their own colonies to protect, and they understand fighting in ways we never can. The debate raged for hours. Gray shared everything they had learned about humans during their stay on Earth, their innovative thinking, their ability to adapt to new threats, their surprising gentleness despite their strength. But fear ran deep in the council. The idea of deliberately inviting Deathworlders into their space was almost unthinkable. Then the next report arrived. The raiders had been spotted near the Crimson Nebula, less than a week's travel from the Alliance homeworld. Their ships were larger this time, organized into attack formations. They're not just raiders, Gray realized, studying the new footage. This is an invasion force. They'd been testing our defenses, learning our weaknesses. The colony attacks were practice. The council room erupted in panic. The Alliance homeworld had perfect conditions: low gravity, stable climate, no dangerous wildlife. Against a force of Deathworlders, it would be as defenseless as the colonies. "We have no choice," Elder Reed finally declared, raising her voice above the chaos. "Ambassador Gray, send a message to Earth. Tell them." She paused, centuries of instinctive fear warring with desperate need. "Tell them we request their help." Gray moved to the communications station, their fingers steady despite the gravity of the moment. As they composed the message, they remembered Captain Stone's words about how Earth's challenges have forced humans to adapt and grow stronger. Perhaps this crisis would do the same for the Alliance. The response from Earth arrived faster than anyone expected. A simple message: "We're on our way. Hold tight." Looking at the fearful faces around them, Gray understood that the hardest part was still to come. The Alliance would have to overcome generations of fear and prejudice. But as they watched the raid footage one more time, noting the cruel efficiency of the attacks, they knew there was no other choice. To survive this threat, they needed allies who understood how to fight back. They needed Deathworlders, but the right kind of Deathworlders. The training hall of the Alliance Defense Academy looked different now. The elegant meditation chambers and virtual combat simulators had been pushed aside to make room for something humans called a combat gym. Gray watched from the observation deck as Captain Stone worked with the first group of Alliance defense forces. "You're all thinking about strength the wrong way," Stone explained, standing before the nervous Alliance troops. He picked up one of the training staffs, specially designed to work in the facility's reduced gravity. "It's not about how hard you can hit. It's about using what you have effectively." The Alliance soldiers exchanged uncertain looks. Their bodies were built for speed and precision, not combat. Even with the gravity set to their normal levels, they felt awkward holding weapons designed for actual fighting instead of ceremonial display. Stone called one of them forward, a young soldier named Bright. "Try to hit me," Stone said, holding the staff loosely at his side. Bright hesitated, then lunged forward with the staff. Stone barely moved, just shifted his weight slightly, and Bright went tumbling past him. "See," Stone helped Bright up. "You have natural speed and amazing balance, but you're fighting like you think you need to be strong like us. Don't. Use what you already have." Over the next few hours, Stone showed them how to turn their natural abilities into advantages. Their flexible joints meant they could dodge in ways humans couldn't. Their light bone structure made them incredibly quick. Even their instinctive fear response, bred by generations of peaceful living, could be useful. It made them naturally cautious and good at spotting danger. Gray moved down to the training floor as Stone began teaching them about tactical thinking. The human had set up what he called an obstacle course, but it was unlike anything the Alliance had used before. Instead of testing pure physical abilities, it required soldiers to make quick decisions and use the environment. "The Raiders are stronger than you," Stone told them, walking through the course. "They're probably stronger than us too. But strength isn't everything. Earth's history is full of smaller creatures surviving against bigger predators. You know how. They got smart. They worked together. They used their environment." He demonstrated by showing how a lighter person could use momentum to topple a heavier opponent, how coordinated teamwork could overcome superior strength, how terrain could be used for protection and advantage. The Alliance soldiers began to understand. Their weakness could become strength if they thought about it differently. "Your ships are faster and more maneuverable than anything I've ever seen," Stone continued. "But you use them like luxury cruisers. Start thinking of them like interceptors. Hit fast, get out faster. Use your superior navigation to fight in asteroid fields where bigger ships can't follow." Gray remembered their first meeting with Stone, how they had feared him simply for being a Deathworlder. Now they watched him work patiently with Alliance troops, adjusting his teaching style to match their needs, never pushing too hard, but never letting them give up either. A month into the training, Stone organized a combat exercise. Alliance troops against human Marines in simulated combat. The Alliance soldiers were nervous, but they remembered their training. When the exercise began, they didn't try to match the humans for strength. Instead, they used quick hit-and-run tactics, coordinated team movements, and clever use of cover. The results surprised everyone except Stone. The Alliance team didn't win, but they held their own. More importantly, they finished the exercise with new confidence. They had stood against Deathworlders in combat and proved they could fight effectively. "The Raiders think you're weak," Stone told them afterward. "That's their mistake. Every species, every planet, every culture has its strengths. The trick isn't trying to be something you're not. It's learning to use what you are to your best advantage." Gray watched the soldiers practicing their new techniques, seeing how they had started to adapt human combat principles to their own natural abilities. They were still the same Alliance species, light-boned, peace-loving, cautious by nature. But now they moved with purpose, with understanding, with growing confidence. Stone joined Gray at the observation point. "They're learning fast," he said. "Faster than I expected." "We've had to," Gray replied. "The Raiders left us no choice. But I'm starting to think that's not entirely bad. Sometimes it takes a crisis to push us past our limitations." Stone nodded. "That's another lesson from Earth. Pressure either breaks you or makes you stronger. Your people aren't breaking." Below them, the Alliance soldiers continued their training, preparing for a fight they never wanted but could no longer avoid. They were still afraid, but they were learning that fear could coexist with courage. That being peaceful by nature didn't mean they couldn't defend themselves when necessary. That sometimes the best teachers were the ones you once feared most. The alert came during the night cycle of Hope Colony. Raiders had been spotted entering the system, 3 of their black ships moving with predatory intent toward the settlement. But this time, things were different. This time, they were ready. Gray stood on the bridge of the Alliance ship Swiftwind, watching the tactical display with newly trained eyes. Beside them, Captain Stone monitored the incoming data from his command station. The bridge crew, a mix of Alliance personnel and human advisors, worked their stations with focused efficiency. "Enemy ships on approach," the sensor operator reported. "Same attack pattern as New Haven Colony." "They're expecting an easy target," Stone said quietly. "Let them keep thinking that." The Raiders entered weapons range. Their ships were larger, built for intimidation with sharp angles and exposed weapon mounts. In the past, such a sight would have sent Alliance ships fleeing. Now, the Swiftwind and its escorts held position, protected by the asteroid field they had chosen as their battleground. "Wait for it," Stone cautioned as the Raider ships drew closer. "Let them commit to the attack run." Gray felt their scales tighten with tension, but they trusted the plan. The Raiders had superior firepower and stronger ships, but they had become overconfident. They never expected their prey to fight back effectively. The first Raider ship fired, its heavy weapons blazing through space, but the Swiftwind was already moving, its lighter frame dancing through gaps in the asteroid field that the bigger ships couldn't navigate. The other Alliance ships followed, executing the maneuvers they had practiced countless times. "Now," Stone commanded. Alliance ships emerged from hiding spots among the asteroids, their weapons firing in coordinated patterns. They didn't try to match the Raiders' raw power. Instead, they targeted engines, weapons, and sensor arrays with surgical precision. Human gunners, working alongside Alliance crews, added their experience to the attack. The lead Raider ship turned to face the new threat, but its bulky frame made it slow to maneuver in the dense asteroid field. Alliance ships darted around it like fish around a sea predator, each shot carefully placed to disable rather than destroy. "They're trying to regroup," the tactical officer reported, moving to clear space. "Don't let them," Stone ordered. "Keep them in the rocks. Remember your training." The Alliance ships pressed their advantage, herding the raiders deeper into the asteroid field. Small, precise hits added up. One raider ship lost engine power. Another spun out of control, its sensors blinded. The third tried to retreat but found its path blocked by carefully positioned Alliance vessels. Gray watched in amazement as the battle plan unfolded. The raiders were stronger, yes, but strength meant little when you couldn't bring it to bear effectively. The Alliance ships were fighting smart, using their environment and their natural advantages instead of trying to match the raiders' brute force. A cheer went up from the bridge crew as the first raider ship signaled surrender. The second followed shortly after, its weapons disabled and hull breached in multiple places. The third managed to limp away, but its retreat sent an even more powerful message than its capture would have. "Security teams, prepare for boarding," Stone announced. "Remember, they're stronger than you. Work in teams, use your stunners, and don't take unnecessary risks." Gray accompanied the boarding party, protected by both Alliance and human security personnel. Inside the captured raider ship, they found something unexpected. The raiders weren't the unstoppable warriors they had imagined. They were just bullies who had never expected their victims to fight back effectively. After the battle, Gray stood with Stone in Hope Colony's main square. Above them, Alliance ships patrolled proudly alongside their human allies. Engineers from both species were already studying the captured raider ships, learning their weaknesses for future encounters. It wasn't about being stronger than them, Gray realized, watching Alliance children playing fearlessly under the colony's protective dome. It was about being smarter, more coordinated, more determined. Stone nodded. That's a lesson humanity learned long ago. The strongest creature doesn't always win. It's the one that adapts best, that learns to use its capabilities most effectively. Your people just proved they can do that. The victory at Hope Colony changed everything. Word spread quickly through Alliance space. Colonies that had lived in fear began to hope again. Defense forces that had doubted themselves found new confidence, and the raiders, for the first time, learned that their strength alone wasn't enough. Most importantly, the Alliance learned that having humans as allies meant more than just having strong friends to hide behind. It meant learning to be strong themselves, in their own way. The raiders had wanted to teach them fear. Instead, they had taught them courage. The Alliance homeworld's 3 moons hung in perfect alignment, their light casting multiple shadows across the capital city's crystal spires. Gray stood in the emergency command center, their scales pale with shock as they watched the incoming sensor data. The raiders had finally revealed their true strength. Hundreds of ships were emerging from hyperspace, not the small raiding parties they had faced before, but a full invasion fleet. The black ships blocked out the starlight, their massive forms arranged in attack formations never seen before. "They think our homeworld will be easy prey," Stone said, studying the tactical display. "Low gravity, no natural defenses, perfect weather. They expect us to break at the first sign of real force." The Alliance Council huddled nearby, their fear evident but controlled. The past months of fighting back against raiders had changed them. They were still afraid, but it was no longer the paralyzing fear of the past. "The human fleet is still 6 hours out," Elder Reed reported. "We need to hold until they arrive." Gray looked at the Alliance ships gathering in orbit. Once, they had been purely diplomatic and trading vessels. Now they bristled with weapons and tactical upgrades, their crews trained by human experts. But they were still outnumbered 5-1. The raiders didn't bother with demands or threats. Their first strike came fast and hard, a wave of missiles and energy weapons that lit up the night sky. Alliance orbital defenses responded, using the tactics they had learned. Their ships broke into smaller groups, using their superior maneuverability to avoid the worst of the barrage. "They're targeting our weather control stations," the tactical officer announced, "trying to destabilize the atmosphere." Gray felt their hearts sink. Without the weather control network, their perfect climate would collapse. Storms would form, temperature would fluctuate wildly. conditions that would devastate their population, but barely affect the raiders. Concentrate defenses around the weather stations, Stone ordered. Use the orbital platforms for cover. Make them work for every inch. The battle in orbit became a desperate dance. Alliance ships darted between their attackers, striking weak points and drawing fire away from crucial facilities. Every trick they had learned, every lesson paid for in blood and fear, was put to the test. Hours passed. The raiders pressed their attack, their frustration growing as the supposedly weak Alliance forces refused to break. They had expected an easy victory over soft creatures, used to perfect conditions. Instead, they found an enemy that refused to give up. Hull breach in Weather Station 4. Someone shouted. We're losing atmospheric control. Wind began to howl through the capital city's streets for the first time in generations. Rain fell, then hail. The population took shelter, but they didn't panic. They had trained for this, prepared for the worst while hoping it would never come. Human fleet detected. The sensor operator's voice carried relief and excitement. Multiple hyperspace signatures. The raiders detected the new arrivals too. They turned to face the threat, spreading their forces thin. That was when the Alliance forces struck back. Every ship, every weapon, every crew member gave everything they had. They wouldn't let their homeworld fall. Human ships burst into real space, their weapons already firing. They drove straight into the heart of the raider fleet, their heavier ships absorbing punishment that would have destroyed Alliance vessels instantly. But they weren't fighting alone. Alliance ships swooped and dove through the chaos, striking precisely at exposed flanks and weakened shields. Human strength and Alliance precision combined into something neither species could have achieved alone. Look at them run, Stone said with grim satisfaction as the raider fleet began to break apart. Ships designed to intimidate and overwhelm turned to flee from the combined might of two species they had underestimated. The battle wasn't over. The weather was still dangerous, many ships were damaged, and the raiders would likely return. But as Gray watched human and Alliance crews working together to restore the weather control network, they knew something had changed forever. The raiders had thought attacking the Alliance homeworld would break their spirit. Instead, it had proven just how strong they had become. In the command center, humans and Alliance members worked side by side, coordinating repairs and defense plans, no longer separated by fear or prejudice. We're not so different after all, Gray said quietly to Stone as they watched the rescue operations. We both know what it means to protect our homes. Stone nodded. That's what makes us strong. Not where we evolved, but what we choose to fight for. Above them, the first weather control station came back online, and the storms began to calm. But the Alliance had learned that they could weather any storm, face any challenge, as long as they stood together with their human allies. The grand chamber of the Alliance Council sparkled under the light of 3 moons. Its crystal walls had been repaired after the battle, but some scars remained deliberately unhealed, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Gray stood before the assembled council members, human representatives, and delegates from across Alliance space. The room had changed from the last time they had addressed the council. Environmental controls now operated at a compromised setting. Slightly higher gravity and variable temperature that both species could tolerate. It was no longer about keeping conditions perfect, but about finding common ground. 1 year ago, Gray began, their voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. I stood in this room and warned about raiders threatening our colonies. We were afraid then, not just of the raiders, but of accepting help from those we called Deathworlders. The council members shifted in their seats, remembering their own fierce resistance to the idea of alliance with humans. How foolish those fears seemed now, after everything that had happened. Look at us today, Gray continued, gesturing to the mixed audience. Humans and Alliance members working together, learning from each other, growing stronger not despite our differences, but because of them. Through the chamber's transparent dome, they could see ships patrolling in formation. The sleek Alliance vessels now flew confidently alongside the more robust human ships. Each design had its purpose, its strengths, its role to play in their shared defense. The Raiders thought our differences made us weak. They saw our perfect worlds, our love of peace, and thought we would be easy prey. They saw human strength and thought it could only be used for destruction. They were wrong about both of us. Gray touched a control panel, and holographic images filled the air. They showed Alliance crews operating with newfound confidence, human instructors teaching advanced navigation techniques, joint research teams developing new technologies that combined both species approaches. From humans, we learned that strength isn't just about physical power. It's about adaptability, determination, and the courage to face challenges instead of hiding from them. We learned that facing difficult conditions doesn't make you cruel. It can make you innovative, resourceful, and surprisingly gentle. Stone sat among the human delegation, nodding slightly as Gray spoke. Their shared experiences had forged a friendship that once seemed impossible, proving that understanding could overcome even the deepest fears. And humans learned from us too. Our precision technology, our diplomatic skills, our ability to find peaceful solutions. Together, we've created something neither species could achieve alone. The images changed to show the recent victories, raiders retreating from Alliance space, former victims becoming strong defenders, new colonies being established with both species working together to make them safe and prosperous. The raiders wanted to teach us fear. Instead, they taught us courage. They wanted to prove we were weak. Instead, they showed us how strong we could be. They wanted to drive us apart. Instead, they brought us together. Gray touched another control, revealing the proposed treaty that would formalize the alliance between their species. Its terms were the product of months of careful negotiation, respecting both cultures while combining their strengths. Today, we're not just signing a military alliance. We're acknowledging a fundamental truth, that true strength comes in many forms, that what we once feared can become our greatest asset, that differences can be a source of power rather than division. The council members looked at each other, then at their human counterparts. The fear that had once filled this chamber was gone, replaced by mutual respect and shared purpose. Let the raiders return, if they dare. They'll find not weak prey divided by fear, but strong allies united in defense of all our worlds. They'll learn what we have learned, that the greatest power comes not from domination, but from cooperation, not from crushing others, but from lifting each other up. Gray raised their hand toward the ceiling, where the three moons shone down on two species that had overcome their prejudices to forge something new. We are no longer the Alliance alone, hiding in our perfect worlds. We are no longer afraid of those who evolved in harsher conditions. Today, we become something greater than either of us could be alone. Today, we prove that the strongest bonds are those forged between those who choose to overcome their fears and trust in each other. The chamber erupted in applause, human hands and Alliance appendages joining together in celebration of how far they had come and how far they could still go together.